Well, we are excited to be joined by Sunbelt Conference Commissioner Keith Gill here on the Frary Smith Podcast. Keith, thanks for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. Appreciate you having me. Happy New Year to you and Kate. So looking forward to, just our time together. So thanks for inviting me.
Well, Commissioner, it was another great year for the Sun Belt in football. We saw 12 teams in bowl games, the number that led the FBS. We saw a repeat champion following yet another uber competitive year in the conference, another year with a ranked team, and a second straight year hosting College Game Day at a Sun Belt school. What were some of the biggest highlights for you this past football season in the conference?
Yeah, I guess I'll start at the end and work my way back, right? I mean, having 12 bowl teams was just great. That really is a great accomplishment. You got to win a lot of games in the non-conference to put yourself in position to do that. And so I think that really was a microcosm of the great year we had across the board in the Sun Belt, that 12 of our teams qualified for bowl games. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, obviously having two teams to win double-digit games is great. You think about the year that James Madison had, the year that Troy had, I think is really just amazing. I think having 5 bowl champions is phenomenal as well. I just think overall it is a great year. And I think anytime you host game day, I think that's pretty tremendous. That really is just an infomercial for the league and for the school that's hosting it. And so anytime that we can do that, I think that that's a positive thing for the league. So I would just say the number of non-conference wins, the competition we had within our league, and then having 12 bowl teams. I mean, those are probably my highlights of our success in football this year.
Definitely plenty of highlights to choose from, Commissioner. Great to have you as a two-time guest now on the show. And we've had a lot of guests between now and the last time we had you on, and many are saying that the Sun Belt is the premier non-autonomy conference in the country. We agree with that as well, but that also comes with the want and the desire to see the league continue to evolve. So that begs the question, what are the next steps? What does the Sun Belt need to do in order to increase that exposure, increase that revenue, and the overall standing with the college football landscape in years to come?
Yeah, I still think, the one thing that's hanging out there is the New Year's 6, which obviously now that the CFP is growing to 12 will change just being accessed in the playoff. We need to be regular participants in that. I know that we're good enough to do that and certainly can. So I really think that that's the next kind of big step for us, particularly that exposure and then that opportunity to try to advance in the playoffs. So for me, that's like the number one kind of football goal. I think we need to also, we can't rest on our laurels, but we've got to make sure that we maintain our foundation, which I think is always a challenge because of where we sit in the ecosystem, right? We've lost, several really good coaches. Other teams have hired them away, which I think happens when you're doing the things that you want to do. But that does obviously it creates opportunity, but also creates risk. And we've got to make sure that we can continue to have great coaches leading our programs to kind of continue the success that we've had. So I think those two things are just really, really critical, which is one, we've got to start, we want to be regular participants in the college football playoff. And I think we're poised to do that. We certainly are set up to do that. And I'm excited about our opportunities there. And then we've got to keep our momentum by, continue to hire great coaches, because if we're doing what we're supposed to do, there's a great chance that we're going to lose, 2-3 good coaches each year. And we just need to be able to continue to replace them so that we don't miss a step and have any drop off in the quality of our football.
Commissioner, I know, and to your point, a lot of fans are excited about the expansion of the college football playoff because there's now that pathway for conferences like the Sun Belt to make the cut, to get a seat at the table. We've also seen conferences like the SEC and the Big Ten combine and likely further distance themselves from some other conferences. This year, we saw an undefeated Florida State team get left out of the 14 playoff. Do you have any concerns that in the future, a worthy Sun Belt team might miss out on a 12-team playoff?
I don't know that I have concerns. It's not something I think about all the time, but the reality is, that certainly could happen. It's not like Troy wasn't a worthy New Year's 6 entry this year, right? And so, but obviously they missed out. So those things are going to happen. I think that that's just sport. But I think the reality is, with the quality of our league, with the strength of our league, I think if we have teams that have had a lot of success, we're going to be well positioned to do it. So certainly it's one of those things that happens because, there's only a limit. There's only going to be 12 teams, right? So the 13th team is a really good team, right? And they're not going to make it in. So there are going to be good teams left out. We just want to make sure that we put ourselves in a position to not be on that board, and because that's a tough place to be.
No, it's definitely exciting to think of the possibility of a Sun Belt team in that 12-team playoff in the biggest stage of college football. It's definitely exciting to think about that future. But just thinking about the conference realignment and other changes we're seeing at the top of not just college football, but college athletics as a whole, and just looking at the revenue that's now being generated and distributed, some are questioning kind of the overall structure of college football. Should it separate from other sports? Should the Power Five and non-autonomy five possibly separate and have their own different playoffs or postseason? We're probably a little far from those conversations actually happening, but what are your openness to concepts like that? And do you forecast any other big picture changes in the FBS future of football?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think one is the program is under a lot of college athletics is under a lot of pressure, right? So we've got to find a model that isn't under such legal pressure. So I do think changes are on the horizon. And I don't know what exactly those all should be, but I do know that we need to do something that keeps us out of potentially, billion-dollar judgments and being in lawsuits as much as we are. So, but I don't know that football needs to be separate. I mean, I think it's hard. Baseball is important to us in the Sun Belt. Basketball is important to us in the Sun Belt. So I don't know that I want to be saying, I'm going to do these things over here for football and not have the opportunity to do the same things for other student athletes that compete at a high level. So no one's really explained to me what a football czar would do or what separating football does to allow us to do things that we can't do now. I mean, I think if folks have ideas, we can implement them now, bring those ideas, and there's ways to do that. So I'm not huge in terms of separating out the sports. And then obviously I don't support the 8-5 separating or FBS separating. I do think there's enough space in Division I for all of us. I think this is an ecosystem. We all compete against each other. And so I don't really think anybody wants the separation. I read about it a lot in the media. I don't really hear it a lot when I talk to my colleagues in the enterprise. And part of that is because it really is an ecosystem. We play against we compete against each other. You need all of us to build schedules and to have kind of a robust kind of FBS. And so I'm not one to think some sort of big break is imminent. I think we work very well together in the CFP. And I'm not one that wants football separate from all the other sports, just because I think if there's something good for football, then that would work for the other sports too. And I just haven't heard any explanations by how moving football helps us in any kind of meaningful way.
Well, I think that's a great perspective because obviously in a lot of schools, the revenue that's generated for football helps with some of the Olympic sports, the other sports that you're talking about. And I think that that's important to remain in this college landscape. But Commissioner, there's no denying that the transfer portal has changed college athletics, but we think that the Sun Belt continues to be in an interesting spot with it. We've seen many of the league's top players move on to play for bigger programs after this season, but we've also seen a ton of talent infused into the conference because of it. Where do you think the relationship between the transfer portal and the Sun Belt currently stands?
I think you summarized it exactly right. When I was at Houston in the CFP, I was watching Josiah Stewart play in Michigan, right? Well, he was starting at Coastal last year, and this year he's helping Michigan win a national championship. And so I think when you see that, kind of talent, you're just like, oh man, but we're getting our share as well, and I don't know that I've done all the math to say, it's even or we're down a little or we're up a little. I don't know. But, I do think, life generally moves towards an equilibrium. And so I suspect as much as the portal hurts us in some instances, it does help us in others. And it's probably a net neutral. I would say you might say it leans a little towards uneven just because it's harder to manage all the disruption, right? It would be easier just to keep all the talent you have and not get the huge influx that we do get and just manage and grow and work with the talent you have. So it's probably maybe a net negative at the end of the day. But I do think, for every talented, student that we lose, it seems like we pick a talented student. We've had a lot of really good quarterbacks come into the league and have had some success. And so I think it's a mixed bag. I think at the end of the day, you'd like less disruption. So I would err on the side of saying it's not helpful. But I think if you're just doing one-to-one kind of, people going out and people coming in, it's probably close to neutral would be my guess.
Yeah, I mean, you can just look at the all conference list and see it's littered with players that have transferred into the conference. That newcomer of the year award is probably getting more and more competitive now in the conference with the transfer portal. So definitely cool to watch that kind of evolve with the Sun Belt. But you mentioned some of that disruption, and I think now more than ever, the month of December is kind of one of those more disruptive months for head coaches and just college football in general, trying to juggle coaching turnover, playing turnover with the transfer portal opening up in that window in the December winter window, having early signing day as well. And then all these coaches, most of them are trying to prepare for bowl games too. Whether it's that time period or another, do you see any changes or would like to see any for the college football calendar moving forward?
Yeah, I think, I think trying to maybe move the early signing period may make some sense, and make it even earlier, and kind of have a little more separation between the opening of the portal and when early signing period happens, right? And I think if you did that, depending on how early, it would put a little more emphasis on kind of pre-college recruitment rather than transfer recruitment. And you'd have to kind of in some ways establish your kind of pre-college class before your transfer class. And so it could actually slow down the number of transfers just because you'd have to make a determination about how many high school kids you're going to kind of sign, and that's going to determine how many opportunities you have for transfers. So I think moving the portal earlier, I think would be helpful. I certainly have heard a lot of the comments from coaches about the portal when it opens for the sport of football. And the real issue with that is the semester. Obviously you like to move it back, but then you don't give the football students a chance to enroll for the spring. And so, so as soon as you do that, then you've kind of really hamstring their ability to move and prepare themselves in a way that allows them to play for a fall. So I think that one is trickier. I think people, I feel like I heard the comments, during the last bowl cycle as though that's some sort of easy fix. And I guess it is easy fundamentally. We know what the issue is, right? We've got bowls happening at this point and the transfer portal's happening right, adjacent to it. And that's a problem. But if the transfer portal doesn't open, then you got issues with trying to get people eligible for the spring so they can participate and be prepared to play on that new school in the fall. So I think that one's a little trickier, and trying to figure out in terms of doing it creates the problem. But I do think trying to make some adjustments in the pre-college space could slow down some of the transfers, give more opportunities to some of the high school kids, and just manage recruiting in a little bit of a different way.
Hey, there's definitely no denying that the college football schedule, it feels year round at this point. So there's definitely some unique challenges that poses. But the Sun Belt's TV deal, Commissioner, is perhaps the most talked about topic by fans of this conference. So we wanted to ask you about it. Based on publicly available numbers, the league's TV revenue trails behind several peer conferences like the American, like the Mountain West, by several multiples. The Sun Belt's current deal with ESPN runs through 2031. Given kind of the league's success on the football field, what efforts are being made to kind of close the revenue gap? And do you foresee the league trying to renegotiate that deal with ESPN ahead of 2031?
Yeah, I would say that, the way that you kind of characterize the deal is not really the way we think about it, right? I think we feel good about where we are. When I first got here, we had 9 games on linear. We had 30 games on linear this past year. So we continue to grow and evolve with ESPN and feel really good about where we are. That being said, we're always in conversations with them to see how we can do better. We've renegotiated our deal really, I think, 2 or 3 times since I've been here in ways that have been really positive for the Sun Belt, and we'll certainly keep looking for those opportunities as well. But ESPN's been a great partner. Our growth is synonymous with their partnership, and they've given us a great platform to kind of tell our story and we feel really good about it. So, I mean, I think we feel good about our position to compete. We feel really good about where we are with our media partner and our media deal. Like I said, like with everything we do, we'll always look to see if we can get better and continue to improve, which we have done. And ESPN's been a great supporter and a great help in those efforts.
Definitely some good insight there. Sticking on revenue, and this is a topic you talked about in the second question when talking about the next steps for this conference. There's now real evidence that this league continues to lose some of their best head coaches. Just in the last 3 years, we've seen 50% of the league's head coaching positions turn over, and more recently, coaches like Jamie Chadwell and John Summerall are departing for higher paying jobs with fellow non-Autonomy 5 programs. You mentioned that this is a priority moving forward for the league, but what does that plan look like? What do the steps look like as far as seeing some change in that department with head coach salaries moving forward?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think those are institutional decisions, and I don't know that it's always going to be change. I mean, at the end of the day, if the University of Florida wants to hire a Sun Belt coach, I just don't know that is something that you're going to be able to successfully fend off if it really is a dollar to dollar issue. I mean, and that's just life, and so I think the thing that we need to do is continue to hire coaches that make sure our programs are better when they leave than when they came. And as long as we continue to do that, we will be well positioned, and we'll be well positioned, obviously, if those coaches stay, because that's a good thing and that's a positive thing. I don't think those things are fait accompli. But at the end of the day, I do think that, people move for a lot of different opportunities, whether it's more money, family, visibility, region, part of the country. And so I don't know that there's a way that, I think one of the things that I was talking to someone the other day and about hiring, and they're like, yeah, this person though, I don't know if they're going to stay. Well, I wouldn't sit around and worry about it. You can't predict the future. You don't know what's going to happen. You hire the best people you can. You do the best you can to keep them for as long as you can. You make sure that you support them in a way that helps you grow, and then you see what happens. And if they happen to leave, really in some ways, to me, their responsibility was to make sure that the program was better when they left than when they came. So that way you could hire someone in theory that might have had better credentials than they did. At the end of the day, John Summerall wasn't John Summerall when he got there. The guy that left wasn't the guy that came. And I think that people always think about it. They don't understand how people evolve and kind of grow into these positions. So I don't know that we need some sort of huge plan. I think our plan is to keep doing what we do, which is invest in football and want to be great in football. And if we do that, good things will happen to us. And I don't know that good things means every coach that comes here we keep. That's just not realistic, and I think that if people have those expectations, I'm not sure those are the right expectations. I think the right expectations are we hire people who make sure they leave the program better than where it was, and we certainly try to keep them for as long as we can.
Well, and to your point, we have seen some just fantastic hires over the last couple of cycles, and even a GJ Kinney, a Tim Beck coming in and taking those programs to bowl victories this year. I think that speaks to your point. But when we spoke last offseason, part of our discussion centered around NIL. You spoke about the future of it being bright in the Sun Belt. You also expressed a desire to see more national rules and consistency, something that honestly we're all still waiting to see come to fruition. We have another year under our belt when it comes to NIL. Where have you seen the NIL space grow within this conference based on your conversations with the league's coaches and administrators?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think you've seen more kind of activity, in the space, whether it's around kind of individual kind of student athletes. I think the reality, though, is we're no different than most places in terms of, the top folks have more access. I think when you think about it in terms of football, but maybe some of the other sports, you would love to see, some more growth. So I think it's really an emerging kind of thing. I think part of it is folks figuring out and trying to educate them in terms of how do you grow your brand, and how do you go about, securing deals in that regard, because, the collectives only go so far. in terms of trying to do that. I think from a national standpoint, I think we've seen some progress. It'll be interesting to see how some of these new NCAA rules play out in terms of some of the disclosure that's coming in that regard. If we can get kind of a uniform contract just to make sure people aren't signing bad deals, and then to see what kind of movement there will be in the House. So there'll be a hearing next week for the subcommittee that is responsible for these matters, and we'll see where that goes. I think Charlie Baker's done a good thing, but I do think it's going to continue to be hard to have a cohesive strategy when you just have you don't have transparency. You have so much variability from state to state in terms of what you can do in that regard. And then I think there's just so much movement in the transfer space. I don't know that you'll ever feel comfortable with it if all those things are still allowed to be kind of unregulated. There has to be some regulation so that you can have a better strategy that you can apply and you can kind of continue to grow. Because right now it really is the wild, wild west. People are throwing out numbers that you can't verify. You don't know what the market is. You don't know who's telling the truth and who's not. If you're a student athlete, you don't know what you're signing, and you could be signing away rights for years beyond when your eligibility is up. And so I do think the market as it currently sits right now is not a positive market, and some regulation has to come. I think we have some movement, but we certainly need to see a little bit more to feel comfortable, I think, in the NIL space.
No, there's no question about that. It's definitely been fun watching Sunbelt athletes, not just football student athletes, but all student athletes capitalize and take advantage of NIL, but definitely looking for more rules, regulations, and guidelines to help, especially with recruiting as well. Another popular topic that a lot of our listeners were interested in was division play, just the concept of divisions. 9 of the 10 FBS conferences no longer utilize divisions. The Sunbelt is the only conference that still uses them. There was a poll we ran recently on social media, and there's an overwhelming people from the league that are league fans that want to see the divisions stay in place. Could you maybe explain why divisions are so important and what you would say to a crowd of people that want to see the 2 best teams in the conference play as opposed to the division winners that we see now with this current format under the Sun Belt?
Yeah, I think divisions are really important. One, that's how we built the league, right? We really built it on regional rivalries, playing games that matter to fans and their locale. And so I think to go away from that is problematic. So I think that's one reason. And then I think if that's your premise, because you can in theory go away from divisions and just schedule in divisions, right? But then you have a balance issue and a fairness issue, because now you've got people playing a whole division. And if that division in theory is stronger than the other division, they may not have representation, and you may not have the 2 best teams. You might have the 2 teams with the best record, but you may not have the 2 best teams playing in that regard. That's why, in terms of fairness and in terms of what we're trying to do for the league from a brand standpoint, divisions are really important. And then the other thing that I would say is the reason that a lot of the other conferences, particularly the A5 conferences, gone away from divisions is because they're going to have multiple teams potentially eligible for the college football playoffs. I think in that scenario, having your 2 best teams is really important to play, because you don't want one of those teams bumped out because they didn't get a chance to compete for conference champion. And you want to make sure in some ways your strongest team is the team that potentially gets the bye. The reality, and I don't say this to put a ceiling on us, because, maybe we'll have multiple teams in the CFP. However, I think it would be short-sighted of us to make choices to restructure the way we do our championships based on something that really is only really helpful for teams that are going to have 2, 3, 4 teams in the CFP. If you're probably only going to get 1 team in the CFP, then the way that we're doing it works really well and doesn't hold teams up. Versus, if you're going to have multiple teams, then that second team that's getting left out of the championship may not have a path to the CFP, and that's why you would do that. So I just think that as we do our analysis, we think that this is going to serve us better in the long run, and we certainly think that any kind of adverse impacts of having divisions will really rear their ugly heads less than the benefits of having divisions will kind of come to fruition for us.
Well, it certainly seems like fans, they love the divisions from the standpoint of the proximity of travel. And I know that that was part of the changes to the conference, bringing in those new members in years past. It seems to be paying off. Commissioner, in a similar vein, many fans were disappointed that Troy wasn't more strongly considered for a spot in that New Year's Six bowl game this past year, despite winning what many have called the premier non-autonomy conference. What efforts did the league make to help sell Troy's case for inclusion into that CFP selection committee?
The reality is we're always talking to the CFP, right? So we have regular conversations with members of the selection committee. We use kind of our analytics toolkit to provide that information to the college football playoff. So I would say we made every effort, and certainly try to make sure they understood, where Troy kind of fit. And how that worked and the strength of their schedule and the strength of their wins. So I would argue that, we made every effort. We made a lot of strong efforts in that regard. And unfortunately, it didn't carry the day. And I think, I certainly think that was a mistake. I think I would have certainly thought that, with our strength of schedule, that would have been, a really compelling factor in that regard. So the selection committee obviously thought a little different, and that was unfortunate. I think that was unfortunate for Troy because they did have a tremendous year. And the great thing is they did have a chance to play in a Premier Bowl against an A5 opponent. So I think, they certainly had, great rewards, but being in that New Year's Six is something I would argue that they certainly deserved, and we are all disappointed that they didn't have the opportunity to do that.
We definitely agree with you on this podcast. We were on the front lines wanting Troy to be in that game and be the representative, but it's hard to talk about Troy and not talk about conference championship games. They won the last two, and it's something I've thought about a lot, and it's a common question for our listeners as well, as talking about a neutral site potentially for the conference championship game. Most FBS championship games are played at neutral sites, not the Sun Belt. I remember as a former player, having and hosting those games were amazing, and having that access to your college town right after winning a championship is great. Not so much when you're leaving a town with a loss in a championship game at another team's home field, but is a neutral site championship something in a more centralized location that this conference would consider or pursue going forward, just considering the expanded footprint we have now?
Yeah, I would never say never. So I would never say we would never pursue it, but that's not really under consideration right now. I think the way that we manage a football championship makes the most sense for who we are and this point in history for our conference. And I really don't see a need to change, and so I just think that it's nice perk for the team that has the best record to get to host that game. I think it helps us kind of with fan support. I think it's hard kind of mobilizing your fans to figure it all out on a week's notice or even less than that, depending on when you figure out you're in the game. And so I just think for where we are right now as a league, the approach that we have right now makes the most sense. Obviously, if there's some change in that, I don't consider myself obtuse. I certainly have no problem changing and doing things in a different way. But I certainly think right now hosting it at one of the home sites for one of our schools is a nice benefit for those schools for a great regular season. And I think it makes the most sense for us to have the best championship that we can.
Well, and there's certainly no denying it has been an advantage. The home team has won every single game in championship history. But just a couple more questions here. We'll get you on your way. But Kane and I are excited to get a look at that 2024 schedule that's going to come out in just over a month from now. It's probably too late this year, but many fans, have talked about the idea of a rivalry week, maybe establishing it. Think James Madison, Old Dominion, App State, Georgia Southern, South Alabama, and Troy, maybe on the same weekend. Would the league ever consider such a weekend, maybe in November? And what might be some of the factors that would make that challenging?
Yeah, I think we talk about that all the time. So, so to answer your first question, yes, I think the league considers that. I think the reality is that's not always the best kind of positioning for schools. And sometimes schools would rather have a big game like that in October when they know they're going to be people there. I think sometimes Thanksgiving, it can be hit or miss whether or not people think they can have good home crowds. So I think there are a lot of factors about like that kind of go into it. So I think we have those conversations all the time. I think we are open to, what schools would want kind of in that space. And obviously, the last 2 years we've had App and Georgia Southern kind of on that last weekend of the year. And that certainly worked. And we've moved that game around, because it was on a Thursday night. I want to say my first year in the league. So it does kind of depend. So I would say, yes, we're open to it. I do think it's complicated because I don't know that every school wants their best games on Thanksgiving. And so I just think we try to accommodate, what schools think they can do relative to building their fan base and their crowds. And there's a TV component in terms of that, which is, you spread some of those games out across your schedule rather than aggregate them all in the same week for, kind of TV purposes as well. So I just think there's a lot of factors that go into it where that can't be the sole factor. And that's why you find that it happens sometimes, but not in others, just because I think those other factors sometimes can carry the day and move those games into a spot that might be more advantageous for the school, more advantageous for TV, or more advantageous for the schedule, just because, one game over here infects games over there. And so sometimes you can't align all those games in the way that you might because it impacts, it has downstream consequences to when other games are played. So what I would say we talk about it all the time, but it really is complicated. And the schedule's based on a lot of different factors. And sometimes those factors are more compelling and move the game into a place that is maybe different than the end of the season.
Well, Commissioner, it's time for the hard-hitting question of the show. It's become a staple question for our program. We've asked most of our guests what their favorite restaurants are at various Sunbelt schools, and then it dawned on us that you're the perfect person to ask this question because you've traveled to all of these Sunbelt towns, each and every one. Which restaurants or food experiences around the conference maybe stand out to you when you look back at your travels across the conference?
Yeah, that's a great question, and so I'm trying to remember. I, usually when I'm at App, I'll eat at Peppers pretty much every time. Now, partly that's because downtown usually so crowded, and so that's pretty good. So I eat there and certainly enjoy it. I bounce around a lot though. I try like different places. That's probably the one place where I probably go to almost the same place every time. So I guess I choose that one. I'm trying to think here or where else, but everywhere else I kind of bounce around a little bit. So I keep a list on my phone. I'll pull my phone out here. That is Sunbelt's Sunbelt Eats.
This is what we were hoping for.
Yeah, this sounds like a potential series.
Yeah, and so just going through the kind of Sunbelt Eats list. Yeah, so I've got like a bunch of restaurants. So like in Monroe, yeah, I've eaten at the Waterfront Grill a couple times, when I've been in Monroe. Crescent City Grill in Hattiesburg. The Midtowner I eat at a fair amount in Hattiesburg. In Boone, I eat Lost Providence Brewing Company. We always get cookies from Appalachian Cookie Company. But I go to Peppers a lot when I'm there. Let's think here. Crooked Oak Tavern in Myrtle Beach, Rivertown Bistro in Myrtle Beach, and actually I think those are both in Conway actually, but kind of Myrtle Beach. So yeah, I've got a list that I keep on my phone. I add to it. I'm always talking to people because I really do like food. Unfortunately, I could probably lose a few pounds, so probably too much. And and in Alabama, I've got the Conecuh Sausage exit on Evergreen, so I stopped there. So yeah, I've got a whole list here. So next time we're together, I'll have to share it with you.
Yeah, it sounds like in future years on a future episode, we might have to do a food tour around the Sun Belt. Commissioner, we're going to end with this. College football continues to rapidly evolve and arguably in good and bad ways due to the multitude of recent changes, yet the Sun Belt continues to trend upwards. given those changes and everything we've talked about, where do you see this conference, specifically football, being in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, I think really in a good spot. I would say the one thing I would say that's non-football related is if you look at our year this year, we've been a multi-bid NCAA championship conference in every team sport. So we had multiple bids in women's soccer. We had 2 women's soccer. We had 5 men's soccer. We had 4 volleyball, and we had 12 bowl teams. So we are good across the board. If you go all the way back, then we had 2 softball teams. 1 made super regional. We have 4 baseball teams, and then the super regional as well. So I really do think we want to be good at everything, and we're focused on getting better at basketball. That's a really important focus for us and something that we need to continue to get better at. But we're pretty good at every sport. I really think the New Year's Six, the regular New Year's Six piece is key for us in football. That will help keep us where we want to be, keep us in that conversation, keep us in the upper echelon, give us the opportunity to compete against the top teams in the country on a regular basis. I think that is that's really important. And then, at the end of the day, you're only as good as your people, and we need to have great coaches and good student athletes. So we got to continue to have good coaches leading our programs and recruit great students and invest in ways that allow us to do that. So if we keep doing those things, I think we'll continue on our trajectory, and the future will continue to be bright for the conference.
Well, we certainly appreciate your time today and kind of the insightfulness of some of the answers to these questions. So thank you so much for taking some time to come on the Frary Smith Podcast again.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. Happy New Year.